Thanks for coming to the first talk of C Focus. I'm going to quickly introduce the talk and then introduce the speakers. And then after that, we'll play a video. Speaker Tim Etchells and also MEU. So this talk is the globalization of art markets, stress points and growth factors of a regional market. So in this talk, we would like to trace the development and future of the art market in Southeast Asia. So in this panel, we have a speaker and a moderator. Tim Etchells is a veteran of art fairs internationally with a wealth of experience in organizing and developing successful art fairs. As one of the main organizers of Art HK, now Art Basel Hong Kong, Tim has gone on to launch Sydney Contemporary and Art Central, and is a key founder of Taipei Tangdai and the upcoming Art SG this year. Tim has been recognized frequently in the Australian Art Media Power List as one of the most influential persons in the art scene in Australia. MEU is a member of the selection committee for Art Basel Hong Kong and has been the executive director of S.E.A since 2009. Since 2007, she has also been the program director of Fondation d'Entreprise MS Aloft in Singapore, a platform for contemporary artists to explore new expressive forms and bring the creative ideas to life through original works created in situ. You served as a vice president and president between 2012 and 2018 for Art Galleries Association Singapore. She was an adjunct faculty for the course Art History and Civilization East and West at the Singapore Management University from 2001 to 2017. Can we please give a warm applause to our two speakers, please?
Thank you.
So before we begin, we will play a short clip and then I will have the speakers take the floor.
Thank you. Believe it, I do have a life outside of art fairs. I mean, that actually does look very much like the Me, Myself and I show, which isn't entirely the case. There is a huge team of people that make those fairs happen. And actually two of my dearest colleagues are here today. I'm really pleased. Sandy Angus, who's a partner on nearly all those fairs, I think, and Magnus Renfrew, who without Magnus we wouldn't have an Art Hong Kong and now an Art Basel Hong Kong, and also Taipei Tangdai. So anyway, I'm really pleased they're here, and if there are any tricky questions this afternoon, I'm throwing them their way. But it's so nice to be here. It's lovely to be back in an art fair. I haven't been to one for 5 days. We just left Taipei at the weekend, and it was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences we'd had, because we had no idea really how it was going to go, what kind of attendance we were going to get. And I was sort of thinking to myself when I was coming here today, what's the thing I most dread? What's the bit of art fairs that scare me the most? And actually, it's the night before the fair and the hour before it opens, because actually you really don't have any idea whether the people you think are going to come are going to come. And particularly with art fairs, you know, we invite all the collectors and we promote it to all the art buyers and the general public. And we went into Taipei last week. And we worked really hard on ticket sales, massive marketing campaign around Taipei and across Taiwan. And we sold 1,500 tickets. And we wanted probably close to 30,000 people. And all I can tell you is on Sunday afternoon, and this isn't a story I'm particularly proud of, we turned away 2,000 people because the hall was absolutely rammed and the word got out about how successful the fair was. I mean, that'll never happen again because we know obviously how to control those things, but literally the queue went on for half a mile around the event centre, and it got to 3 o'clock and we couldn't let any more people in.
And we can expect that in Singapore.
You can expect that in Singapore. We've seen it before, and dear old Sandy was unfortunately turning people away, and so I'm really sorry, but you just can't come in. So anyway, that's the scary thing about art fairs, is that you never know that's what's going to happen, but fortunately the right thing happened. I thought I'd just kick off with a few art fair facts, because it's quite interesting for people. Obviously, a lot of people here obviously take part in art fairs, either as a gallerist or as a visitor, but it might be interesting to just, I dug out a few facts from the Art Basel Art Fair Market Report, which comes out every year. And I was looking at it this morning, and I wanted to share with you some of the sort of key facts. These are my sort of top 10 favourite facts. Galleries reported that they made 46% of all their sales at art fairs in 2017. And whilst it's difficult, a really good and accurate figure from galleries on the share of sales at art fairs, it's estimated in 2017 that it was circa $15.5 million US. And it's worth adding that galleries can make more than twice that amount in the post-fair follow-up in the weeks afterwards. The cost for galleries to attend fairs in 2017, the total amount of money that galleries invested in taking space and shipping and all the other costs associated was actually $4.6 billion US, which is up from $4 billion the previous year. It's probably because we put our space rates up, I suspect. Anyway, the average gallery attends 5 fairs a year in 2017, which is the same as 2016, but the year before they were doing 6 fairs a year. And I think this is really interesting. The number of major art fairs around the world has doubled in the 10 years to 2017, with at least 260 major international art events, alongside the many hundreds of smaller, specialised and regional and specialist fairs like photo fairs, etc. The US has been one of the main locations for major art fairs in the last 10 years, with their share of between 23 and 30% of the total since 2006. And fairs in Asia accounted for 10% of the total fairs in 2017. And galleries from North America and Europe accounted for 80% of all the space, although those galleries exhibiting in 2017. And the final stat is actually my stat. Often an art fair will be responsible for generating the most concentrated period of art sales for galleries in a year. And I'll give you an example. In Sydney, where we staged Sydney Contemporary last year, the total sales at the fair was 21 million Australian dollars, which would have been the biggest week of art sales in Australia in the year. And the same applies in Hong Kong. If you take out the auctions during the week of Art Basel Hong Kong and our own Art Central, that week will without question be the biggest week of the year in Hong Kong for gallery art sales. So art fairs can really concentrate art sales into a very tight period and give people a real focus. And I'll give you one other kind of stat or one other fact that I always describe to people about art fairs. And when I first got into art fairs now, probably about 15 years ago, I kind of looked at the audience and understood that, and I have a sort of fairly logical brain, and I sort of looked at the audience, and the high end, you have the collectors, and I always describe it like a pyramid. And Magnus has heard this so many times, but I see it at the high end you have the collectors. At the second tier are what I call the art buyers, and they're probably people like me. I'm never going to be a collector, but I love buying art. I buy art for all sorts of reasons. And the third tier of the pyramid are the general public. And to me, the most important sector as an organiser of an art fair is to bring in the buyers, because in the second tier, because everybody knows the collectors, but the most important thing is that we deliver new business, new contacts, to galleries. And whenever I go around the fair and I talk to galleries and I say, how are you doing? And have you made any sales? And they tell me they made a sale. My next question is always, did you know the customer? And when I hear, and I often hear probably more times they say, I hadn't met them before. And I was talking to one of the big gallerists in Taipei last week on the end of the first day. I said, how are you doing? Sales good? He said, yeah. He said, well, we sold a couple of pieces. We sold a piece over $1 million US. And I said, did you know them? No, we never met them. And I feel particularly proud that we create a marketplace where we deliver new customers to people, because once they become an established customer, they then obviously continue to buy with them, we hope.
Yeah, so basically we heard that to have an art fair, I mean, you've been in London and Hong Kong, all the way Sydney and Melbourne and Taipei now. What are the ingredients that are needed to have an art fair as a fair organizer or a business person? What does the city have to have for you to want to have an art fair?
I think there needs to be obviously a basis and a good understanding of art. And also primarily making sure there's an audience base. I often think that we're no different to somebody setting up a newspaper or a magazine. They need to make sure there's a reader market out there. And certainly we need to make sure that we need to feel comfortable that there are enough collectors and buyers and general public that would want to support an art fair. And the other thing is that we also need to understand that there's an art base. So when we went to Hong Kong, there were 35 galleries there, which gave us sufficient comfort that there was a reasonable art market there. And it's interesting now, since the fairs are now established, I think the number of galleries in Hong Kong is probably close to 100.
So you think that the first indication of potential art market for you, potential market for you would be the number of galleries who are actively working and working in the country?
The number of galleries, but I think probably more importantly, the audience base.
Okay.
I think it's understanding there is a
And how
market
do you
out there.
gauge that?
Well, I think you do a lot of research. You talk to the galleries and make sure they know they've got collectors there. You understand the collector base. You also look at the wealth and market. You also look to see how far you can draw in, because most fairs, Hong Kong is a good example, where it's a hub. Obviously we get a good audience from Hong Kong, but it's not just about a Hong Kong audience. It's an audience that come from all around the region.
Right, so, I don't like to keep comparing Singapore and Hong Kong, but it's kind of inevitable. Like when I look at it, Hong Kong has galleries. Even when you were doing Art HK, we knew that there are galleries, and then there were auction houses. Auction houses, do they play a big part in your research? Because we know that in Singapore we used to have auction houses and we've held here, but now we don't have that.
Auction houses, certainly when we went into Hong Kong, we saw that the auctions were very active and working very well, and that certainly helped. My best story about the auctions is that when we went to Hong Kong, Christie's were running their auctions, and we thought it'd be a good idea to co-locate the fair alongside the auction. And we went and had lunch with the chairman of Christie's, and suggested this would be a good idea. And he really wasn't going to entertain this idea, and thought this was not a good idea, and he was very happy running his auctions separately to us. So anyway, we staged the first fair, and it was a huge success. And I always remember Sandy or I got a call from the chairman of Christie's saying, can we have lunch? And virtually ever since, the fair and the auctions have been co-located, and they work pretty well.
But how do you feel about it now? About the auction house aligning your fair? Do you feel that the auction houses are still important in this part of the world?
I think they both feed off each other. I think basically
Okay.
It's all about, they both bring in audiences. And there's audiences that go to the auction, and that audience might also come into the art fair.
So when you were looking at then kind of your plan to come to Singapore, this is before what happened last week, because you made your announcement last year.
Yeah.
So what were the important facts, like let's say top 3 reasons why you wanted to come here?
Because the idea for the fair here is very much about the region. This is all about Southeast Asia. Yes, Singapore is the hub and Singapore is the host, and we feel there is a market in Singapore, but it's really about making sure that we bring in collectors and buyers from all around the region. And that is very much the focus of what we intend to do here. Magnus may be able to tell you a little bit about the fair content and some of his ideas, but the main thing is about making sure this is a true fair for Southeast Asia and making sure that we commit to bringing in the collectors and the buyers from the region. So how we do that is that we appoint VIP managers in each of the key territories. So in Indonesia, we'll probably have 2, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines. You know, there will be a real heavy concentrations of VIP things, exactly like we do in Australia, where we have VIP managers in Perth, in Melbourne, in Brisbane, to make sure we bring in people from all over. It's, again, exactly what we did with Hong Kong.
So, I mean, I've just organized a fair myself, so it could be kind of a strange question. But we always say that there are a lot, I mean, you just mentioned there are 260 major art fairs in our yearly calendar, not counting the regional fairs and smaller fairs such as us. But we also hear a lot about fair fatigue by all the people who go to these different fairs. How do you foresee, or would that apply to what you're going to do in Singapore? How is Singapore going to be different from all the other fairs, in a sense, when the people are brought in to visit the fair, wouldn't they be tired?
I mean, I haven't seen any fair fatigue or whatever it's called at any of the fairs that I've organised. And I don't wish to be too arrogant about it, but we go to a lot of trouble to make sure that they are really well presented. The restaurant facilities, everything about them is good. They're exciting fairs. We work really hard on the marketing and promotion to really make them work and make them have a real buzz. So I don't think our fairs suffer from fair fatigue, and I've never heard any galleries come to me and say, this is a bit boring. Our fairs are fun.
So if you could elaborate for us, so how do you refresh your fairs year after year? Because, I mean, you know, the fairs have been going on for a year after year and it doesn't change, but the content you're saying is that you want to present new and interesting content for the visitors, and that's how you continue to engage them. So what are the things that you work on? Just to give an example.
There's two things. There's the branding and the positioning. So we're always tweaking those every year and changing the colours, changing the font. We work with an architect to make sure we change the layout of the fair. So
this is like my study for next year if it happens.
So, you know, it's never the same old. It never feels like you're going to that same old department store with everything laid out in the same way. It's always a bit different. Okay.
Visual merchandising.
So we look at it from that point of view. There's always a general turn on galleries. There's a change. You know, some come, some go. So you bring in new galleries, and we're always working hard. We're always spending time going around the world seeking out new galleries. It may be 2 or 3 years before they eventually come in, but there's always a lot of work that goes into that. We look at, you'll never see the same talks program year on year. That changes. We're bringing new parties. You know, we encourage new parties and new partners who can bring different elements of the fair. And we, you know, certainly in Sydney's a good example where we work a lot with design people, with furniture design, with fashion people, and even the food people. So we really bring different sectors in to make it more interesting.
So it's basically art fair is not just about art or galleries or the artists, but it's really about the lifestyle that you're presenting. Would you say that?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think that when people come to an art fair, whether you're a collector or a member of the general public, probably a bit more for a member of the general public, you actually want a good experience. You want to spend that 2 or 3 hours, or certainly what I saw in Taipei was actually a day out. These people were coming for a day out, having a really good fun time, going around the fair, enjoying the art. So many people taking photographs, so many people talking and engaging. I was wandering around the fair on Sunday, and I worked to myself, probably 80% of the people in the hall had never seen an art fair like that. They'd never seen an art fair. And that gives me a real kind of, you know, sense of pride. And so we really do think about the visitor experience.
Okay. I mean, on that, what you just said on the last note about how you want to, in Taipei, for example, that they said they've never seen an art fair like what you just had last week. In Singapore, we've had quite a number of fairs come and go, I mean, from small to big. I mean, I guess Magnus can elaborate it if he would like to, but in your personal opinion, what is one thing that we could expect from Art SG?
I think a fair that truly represents the region.
Okay.
And I keep saying that Art SG is about the region, not just about Singapore. But having said that, I'd love to see more people from Singapore itself engage in an art fair here, because I'm not sure that's truly happened to date. Maybe it's happening now, thanks to what you're doing here.
This is just a very small step, yes.
But I think there are people in Singapore that could engage from all sectors, from the finance sector, from the media sector, from the sports sector, whatever. But as I keep saying, it is about bringing people in from the region. And when you look at the population of the region, I think the population of the ASEAN countries is equal to the population of Europe. So I think there's enough people out there to be able to draw to come in here. It'll take time. It'll take time. It'll take investment. But I certainly think the opportunity is there to do it and to really, put Singapore on the art map.
And how do you, I mean, you've been in the art fair business for some time, but how did you get into this?
I guess the honest truth, I guess, is that
Yes, we want
I've
the
been working in
honest
Australia for about 20 years. I live in London, but I've been working in Australia. And I was looking at, I guess my forte is really coming up with new ideas for different events. And I was working on sort of food events and so on. And I saw the Affordable Art Fair in the UK. And Magnus will kill me if I kind of mention this, because people never seem to mention the Affordable Art Fair in the same breath as a high-end art fair. But to me, they're art fairs, and they're a very important part of the cycle, because I think a lot of people go to affordable art fairs and then then broaden their interest and go to other fairs. So I basically saw the opportunity to run the Affordable Art Fair in Australia. So I literally lifted the idea from the UK and took it to Australia.
And was that the Melbourne Art Fair?
Well, the thing in Australia, they hated the word affordable. I could never, because they wouldn't associate. I mean, you have to buy affordable art. You can't buy more expensive art, even though it was art at $2,000 or $3,000. And so we called it Art Melbourne and Art Sydney, but in essence it was an affordable art show. And in doing that, I got to know the art world quite well. I always wanted to do a high-end art fair in Australia. There was the Melbourne Art Fair, which had been running for 30 years, and Bill's here today. He was on the board of the Melbourne Art Fair. And it was a good fair, but I wanted to do something different, and I always wanted to do something in Sydney. And so I spent a lot of time doing it. I pulled away from the affordable art fairs because of the issues with people being associated with it. And so I dreamt up Sydney Contemporary and worked incredibly hard to get that right. And the challenges in Australia to make it work, particularly with the competitive situation with Melbourne, was difficult. But we made it work, and we now have a very successful fair.
Was it like kind of New York, LA kind of thing?
That's something. Or in LA, San Francisco. It was that kind of. And so we built that up. And actually, then in developing that, I got to know the gallery scene quite well. And then Hong Kong came along, and I was having lunch with a friend of mine, a gallerist called Tim Olsen in Sydney, now probably 12 years ago. And I said to him, "Where have you been?" He says, "I've been up in Hong Kong." I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "I've been selling my dad's work." And his father is a very eminent Australian artist called John Olsen. He was selling John's work. I said, "How'd you do it?" So he said, "I took a hotel room and I invited a few collectors." And I looked at him at lunch and said, "Well, that doesn't seem the right way to do it." And he knew that I was in the fair business. He said, "You should do an art fair." And I'd never been to Hong Kong. And so on the way back, I stopped into Hong Kong, and that's how the whole thing came together. And as soon as we realised that where we saw the opportunity, and again, it was about bringing people in from around, and so much about that. But we needed to hire someone who could really make that fair work. And we were very lucky that we met Magnus, who at the time was working for Pearl Lam up in Shanghai. And Magnus came to join us. And I always describe the role that Magnus has as a bit like the editor of a magazine. He is the Anna Winter. He is the person.
Yes.
And in the early days, we would argue because we were commercial, and Magnus had very clear views about how that fair was going to develop. And I see a very similar kind of thing here, where Magnus and Shoyan, and we're so lucky here because we have Shoyan, who's worked with she's worked previously she worked for Christie's, then she worked with the last 2 years on Art Central, so it's got art fair experience. So she's going to be based down here as our fair director, and Magnus will be working very closely with us. So we've got a really strong editorial, curatorial team.
Well, yes, I remember when S.E.A was applying for the first time to Art HK, Magnus came to us and he said, "Emmy, you have to improve your booth. The selection committee is not really convinced," so we had to change the whole proposal.
So you came in, you got in?
We did. So we were thankful to Magnus for that.
But that's interesting. That's the role of a good fair director.
Right.
Is to work with the galleries.
With the galleries, yes.
And Magnus will see the potential to work with you. He'll spend time looking at the galleries' websites and say, maybe you should submit that artist or do this, or maybe you should do a solo show or whatever. And that is one of the things. And again, that's what we'll do here. We'll really work with galleries to make sure they bring art that we think is relevant to the fair.
Yes, I think a lot of people don't realize that essentially, even with galleries and the fairs, it is really about collaboration, and everybody has its part to play. So after Singapore?
After Singapore?
Yeah, what else? Where else?
I think we're always looking, but I think, to be honest with you, you asked me earlier about how do we keep the fairs fresh. That's by working on them and changing them every year. So we have enough work to do that. So I think we're pretty happy doing what we're doing, and we've got a challenge. The 4 art fairs this year is a big challenge.
That's a lot.
And of course we travel all the time to other art fairs.
Yes,
so.
I mean, we can imagine. I mean, you said average number of fairs a gallery does in a year is 5, and 5 is such a large number for a gallery to do a fair, because now with those sales, like 46% of gallery sales are done at art fairs. So as galleries, we take art participating in art fairs really seriously, just as much, or if not more, important than putting the show. So it's become a very, very important part of our galleries' lives. I would like to take now this, thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks Magnus, Tim, and Sandy for coming in after such a heavy week last week in Taipei to be with us this week. So I would like to open the discussion, the questions to the floor. To Tim or any of Magnus. Yes?
I actually have 2 questions for you. My first question is, and I noticed in your pyramid, you sort of seem to differentiate between collector, buyer, and then your general audience. How do you differentiate between the 3?
Between?
The 3.
Oh, okay. Well, the collectors is clearly that they are established collectors. So they're people that are known collectors. We create a database of those collectors. We get to know them through the galleries, or we'll know them through other sources. So we have a VIP director whose job it is to constantly refresh that database and make sure we have relevant collectors. The buyer market is actually much harder, because that's people who are working in, say, finance. They're wealthy people who we think would like to come to an art fair and like the experience of an art fair as opposed to perhaps going to a gallery. So we work very hard to get those people, and that's really, again, our marketing team will be sort of, and I describe it as sort of beg, borrowing, and stealing databases, and doing lots of partnerships. So we're going to talk to banks, we're going to talk to different organisations, associations. It may be sailing clubs, it may be sports clubs. It's where we think we can identify those people and build that database. And certainly in Sydney, where in Australia, there's probably somewhere between, I guess, 700 and 1,000 known collectors at best. So the art buyer audience is much more important, and these are the people that will happily spend money on boats and houses and things like that. And we work really hard to target those people. And then the general public are, in the main, fairly easy. Social media comes in quite heavily with that part of the marketing campaign. But we're always thinking about those 3 sectors and making sure that the fair is relevant to each of those sectors of the audience.
Okay, thank you. My second question then is back to, Emmy, what you brought up about fair fatigue.
Yes.
I like where you coined that phrase. It's quite good, actually. So I think going a little further than that, my question would be the size of the market and, basic supply and demand, and how, in your mind, how do you sort of discern whether or not a market can sustain another art fair, particularly if maybe they're booked very closely together as far as the dates? Be curious to know what you think about that.
The dates is a challenge, because with 250 art fairs around the world, and I don't know, probably 20, 30 that are significant art fairs, finding dates in the calendar is a challenge, certainly, from a gallery perspective. You just have to make sure that the fair really stands up. You've got to be really sure that it's a good visitor experience. You've got to really make sure that target audience that you're aiming at will come to that fair. And you it's all about marketing it and getting the positioning out, making sure that people know about it way out in front. We invest very heavily in things like PR. We work with Sutton PR, which is the top PR agency in the world. So it's really about making sure that you have a really strong product that's well marketed and people know about it and it's fresh and it's relevant. But we're not, believe it or not, we're not constantly looking over our shoulder at other art fairs. We're more focused on what we do and making sure that our event, our product is right and really stands out. And yes, in the back of my mind, I do worry that somebody might go to another art fair instead of ours. But to date, that hasn't been an issue for us.
Any other questions for Tim or myself on art fair, art business? Yes, Magnus?
This one's for Emmy. Congratulations, by the way, on C-Focus. But I was just interested to understand from you, now that in this different role, what do you feel was the major challenge that you faced in launching the first edition of C-Focus?
Well, I have to say, when Tim mentioned about the night before, I didn't realize it, but I think I was really very worried about the night before. And in fact, you know, on the day of itself, when we opened last night, even before the opening, I was just getting very, very nervous. I was nervous, and I was thinking, gosh, the fair looks great, but what if people don't come? I mean, it doesn't matter who you have in your stand. You can have all these really big name galleries, but if people don't come, it doesn't mean anything. So, Magnus, I know exactly how you feel every time before you open the fair. So that was really the biggest thing. And also I think for Gillman Barracks, and this is I've never done anything like this before. I was always on the other side. So I've been really fortunate to have had such a great team who just supported, and we just plowed through to just get this done. But I think the other challenge was that Singapore, the weather is really unforgiving, and Gillman Barracks is most probably the challenging place to have something like this big event. And being just kind of coming off tail end of the rainy season, we were really, really not sure whether we can not have the rain. And I remember Audrey, myself, and Jason, we were talking about what we need to put the chilies on the ground, or what do we have to do. And somebody close to Audrey even suggested to do some kind of ritual thing, and we're like, no, we shouldn't be doing that. I mean, not that far, but these small details were really challenging for us, because it's out of our control, we cannot help it. So yeah, that was it. And yeah, I appreciate fair directors and fair organizers so much more now. Any other questions from the audience? No? Anything would you like to say? I do have one question for you, Tim. All your fairs do not have like a branding. I mean, everything is either, you know, you have a Taipei Dang Dai, you have Melbourne Art, Sydney Contemporary, like it's not under one branding umbrella. Was it done on purpose?
Yeah, because I think each fair has its own identity. And I think often the best restaurants, you go into the ones of the individual restaurants rather than the chains. So I think it's better that they have their own identity. I think on the other hand, it's good that people know there is a connectivity between us. And I would suggest that we're a necklace rather than a chain. So we are connected. We bring in similar values to each of the fairs, but I don't necessarily see it's important that we were... I mean, the Art Basel brand works for Basel and Frieze works for Frieze, but it's not necessarily the route that we would want to go.
Okay.
And I think also, particularly when you're working in places like Sydney, where the Australians want their own identity, they want their own fair, I think for them to think that it was part of a bigger group that had moved into Australia wouldn't give it the same uniqueness that it has. So I think it's better, and every fair is different. You know, what we saw in Taipei was different. What we'll do here in Singapore will be different. So I think it's not right to...
Just one last question. So we're going back to this fair fatigue. I mean, fair fatigue is the term that we've been using in the art world, both by the gallerists or the visitors or whoever have you. But do you kind of foresee that maybe perhaps in the years to come, even in short years to come, in the next 5 years, the number 260 may trim down?
I don't know. I mean, it depends really what happens in terms of the gallery market, because if that 46% becomes 55 or 60%, then I think the number of fairs will stay where it is. I don't think there could be many more, because there just aren't the dates in the calendar. But I don't really see, there's no signs at the moment that they're backing away. I mean, yeah, if a fair that comes out isn't very good in the first year, it'll disappear. But there's nothing indicating to me at the moment that fairs are going backwards. And in fact, there are still, the next week, in a month's time, you've got the News Freeze LA fair, so they're still cropping up everywhere.
I mean, so basically, we see the trend of fairs coming out of cities, so it becomes a kind of a whole city event rather than what we used to traditionally have, those big fairs in different, like major cities. So that's what you're seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it engages the city. I mean, you know, suddenly, you know, Hong Kong became Hong Kong Art Week, and now there are so many parties and things that happen. You know, it's unbelievable. It's now, I think for hotels in Hong Kong, it's now their best week of the year. I mean, they get the highest rates of the year. It's not great for staying there,
yeah, not
or for us, because I always wish when I go into a new city that we went around all the hotels and said, remember the people who bought this to you, because the economic impact on the city is huge.
Yes, I mean, hopefully. Well, we look forward to, if you don't have any more questions, we can end here, and we really look forward to you later part of this year then.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you.
See you back in October.
Yes, thank you
Thanks.
very
Okay.
much.